Today, we remember the life and legacy of Indianapolis Colts owner Jim Irsay. Let's get to it.
You are Locked On Colts, your daily Indianapolis Colts podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, everybody. Thanks for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. This is your daily podcast covering your Indianapolis Colts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. What is up, everybody? This is Jake Arthur of horseshoehuddle.com. And as I mentioned from the top, we are obviously today honoring the life of Indianapolis Colts owner Jim Irsay. He, of course, passed away in his sleep Wednesday afternoon. A little bit unexpected. He had begun suffering some health issues, some more serious ones around December 2023. And since then, his public appearances had become less and less, but certainly not the news that we really expected to hear Wednesday afternoon. Kind of a gut punch, to say the least. After it was announced, the NFL community, the Central Indiana community, the sports world, just remembrances and condolences came pouring in. You could see from former Colts players and personnel, it was just palpable what emotions they were feeling as they really kind of agonized over the news that they were hearing. And this just goes to show there was a couple images of Irsay, nationally. He was a very outspoken owner, certainly someone out in the spotlight a little more than others, but kind of a unique cat, all of his own, kind of the hippie rock and roll type of owner that was just kind of cut from a different cloth. But here locally, we knew him as something that, of course, but a much more generous person, even beyond that. And I think what's even more endearing is, we've all seen the Twitter contests, how generous he was with that. We've seen, him passing out straight cash during training camp to fans. We've seen that. That's all very out in the open. But just how many things I have seen and heard, not only in the last 24 hours, but over the last several years, just little stories and anecdotes of things he kind of did behind the scenes in the dark without wanting other people to see it. This was definitely a rich billionaire guy who I think lived the way a lot of us would perhaps want to do that. I think Kyle Brandt from Good Morning Football said that very well. He liked cool stuff and he wanted to pay it forward. He's definitely not the kind of guy who was just going to hold on to all of his own money. He wanted to make the world a better place and share what he could. And, he became the owner of the Colts in 1997. He took this franchise from kind of a laughingstock and an erratic, chaotic leadership under his father, Bob Irsay, that ultimately, moved the Colts out of Baltimore and here to Indianapolis, took them from an awful team, again, a laughingstock, to a team that, sat near the top of the mountain in the NFL landscape for a while. He went and traded for Bill Polian, who is one of the greatest roster architects in NFL history. They then used the first-round pick in '98 on Peyton Manning after getting Edgerrin James the year before, and then Marvin Harrison shortly before that. Edgerrin James is actually the year after, of course. But no, they turned this team around in a hurry. They literally were 3-13 Peyton's rookie year, and then 13-3 the year after. And then from that, just after, solid roster building and investing in the right players, they really turned this thing around. And as a result, turned the city of Indianapolis around. There are so many things that are different now, obviously, than when you look 20 or so years ago. But just the money that this team and Irsay himself has generated into the city is just, it's really hard to put into words. Personally, I was with the Colts from 2018 to 2020, writing for their website. And I heard of so many things about him behind the scenes. I worked with Andrew Walker, who shared on Twitter last night, every team employee on their birthday would get like a crisp $100 bill and a birthday card for their birthday from, a billionaire who doesn't even have to show his face, let alone acknowledge that his employees exist. I think that's very different to see in a lot of aspects with people who are super rich. There's a pretty big disconnect between them and the common man. But I think Irsay, of course, was just a guy who, again, a unique cat cut from a different cloth, and he certainly will be missed. So here in a moment, guys, I'll shut up. I'll bring you the conversation I had with Zak Keefer from The Athletic. Again, he was on the beat for the Colts with the Indy Star and with The Athletic. He was with that, covered the Colts for over a decade. He's still with The Athletic now, covering the NFL nationally, but had a good relationship with Jim Irsay. I think he can share a lot of unique things about that relationship, and then really what's also to expect next, because I do think that's naturally a question we all have is, this is very sad, but the Indianapolis Colts franchise will still exist beyond this. So what comes next? So with that, we're going to hear from Zak Keefer in just a moment. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. And that's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. LinkedIn's new feature can help write job descriptions and then quickly get that job out in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. Just add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. It's no wonder 72% of small businesses say that LinkedIn has helped them find the right high quality hires. So again, post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, so I had to go out and get one of the absolute best people to speak on this topic today, and that is Zak Keefer of The Athletic. He covers the NFL nationally now, but he was here on the beat with the Colts for a decade. And I've got to imagine, a guy like Jim Irsay certainly made your life very interesting. I mean, I read a piece that you wrote this morning, and it was a nice little kind of look behind the curtain at kind of the access, the special access that a guy like that would give to us in our position.
Yeah, Jake, interesting is a good word, but it probably doesn't do full justice, right? So after I left the Colts beat to sort of move to a national beat, I travel around the country and I'm at every NFL training camp, games all over the place. And the one question I get more than any other from beat writers, from agents, from assistant coaches, from executives is, what is Jim Irsay really like? And I always tell them, like, how much time do you have? Because this could be a 10-minute answer. This could be a 3-hour answer. And that's what a relationship with Jim Irsay was like. You get into sports because you love sports, but also I got into sports coverage because I was fascinated by the people in the game and around the game. And I don't think I'll ever meet anyone as interesting, as unique as Jim Irsay. You know this. Anyone who's been around the Indianapolis media market knows this. I always thought that his perception nationally was one thing, and it was almost a polar opposite in Indianapolis. And I'll remember Jim Irsay not for the rambling press conferences and the bold statements, 3 Lombardis and all that. I will remember the man, and sometimes these very private, intimate moments, he would call me late at night, and we would talk football for hours, and it was really cool. And I know my beat writing friends across the NFL were very jealous.
Yeah.
That I had that kind of relationship with the owner. But, it took time, it took trust, and we didn't always get along, but he was one of one in so many ways. And I will be forever grateful that I got to cover the team that he owned.
Yeah, I always thought it was interesting where, those of us who've spoken to him and everything, it always seemed to be after a piece where, maybe it didn't necessarily go in the most positive light his way, but he was always willing to talk it out, which I think is very incredibly rare. So for you, obviously it's very, again, unique for an owner to be that way, but I guess, how has this helped, what have you taken away from this in your career? Just those moments to get that perspective from an owner. I mean, a lot of us, we kind of have to put pieces together ourselves, but you actually had the owner of a team kind of, gleaming how they see things a little bit.
I have a friend who covers the Commanders, and he would ask me how often I got to chat with Jim Irsay. And this was when Dan Snyder owned the Washington football team.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I talk to him all the time, calls, texts, etc. And he said, I've been in a room with Dan Snyder one time in 10 years. So that's the other side of the spectrum. And Irsay was certainly not normal and certainly not predictable. And he was authentic in his own way. But two parts to answer your question. One, he was a unique NFL character. Forget the media side of it. He was 12 years old when he sat down in a spot in the lunchroom in Baltimore and was having lunch, and Johnny Unitas said, "Move your ass, kid." Like, that was his welcome to the NFL moment.
Yeah.
You know, and yeah, he was the son of the owner, but that wasn't easy. That didn't make his life easy. His dad was a horrendous owner, maybe the worst in league history. And Jimmy had to get on the bus and apologize to coaches and teammates after his dad had fired the coaching staff after a preseason game. Like, think about that statement. Life was wartime back then. That's what Jim Irsay told me once, of working under his father, who fired him more times than he could count. So on one end, he had this unbelievably unique NFL existence. I mean, he grew up idolizing the Rooneys and the Hunts and the Hallases, and he considered them his big brothers, his idols in the game, and he cherished those relationships. You know, on the media side, all we want to do as reporters is tell the fans what they don't know, right? So whether you agree with the Colts, and I certainly didn't agree with Irsay all the time, but if I could tell the readers and the audience and the listeners what the team thought when they made this decision, then I'm doing my job. And he let me do that. He would call me and he would tell me what the team was thinking. And I would push back and say, well, this doesn't make sense to me, Jim, or why are you going to do that? I mean, remember, they've churned through like 58 quarterbacks in the last 5 years. So I lived that in a way with Jim Irsay, because they were trying to find this quarterback, and they still haven't found him. We'll see this year. But if you can let the reader and the fans know what the team is thinking, I feel like we've done our job. Doesn't mean they got it right. Doesn't mean they're going to win games, but he didn't keep us in the dark. And the other thing I loved about Jim Irsay is the man didn't believe in cliches. He did not sit at the podium and give us BS. He said what he thought. Now, he would go over here and over here and over here, and we would have jokes about how many different topics we could get into one press conference, and it wore me out. And I don't want to speak for everybody, but Mike Chappell has years on me on the beat.
Yeah.
And the amount of transcriptions he's done for Jim Irsay press conferences trumps everybody. But you know, you get into football, and the great thing about the NFL is it's so fascinating and it's so entertaining and it's so different week to week. But you get into it for the characters, and he was one of one, like I said earlier, and he kept it real with us. He never BS'd us, and it was no 2 days were the same on the Colts beat. That's for sure.
Yeah, and you mentioned kind of the national perception versus the local one, and despite how much he did like, being out there in front and speaking on things, he did a lot of, he's a very philanthropic guy. He did a lot of that, like charity and just generous things just in the dark without people knowing. And I think that's again, super unique, because again, there was the Twitter contest that everyone can see. There's walking around at Grand Park handing out money. But the guy just wanted to be generous and kind of pay it forward at all times, no matter who was looking. So I think that's certainly something endearing for him. And then one more thing I wanted to kind of tackle with you real quick. I think a lot of people, are kind of wondering what's next. Obviously, there is a little bit of precedence with this, with Carly and Kalen being in the building, as much as they are. We've seen back in 2014, they kind of had to take the reins a little bit. So can you explain the dynamic a little bit? Like, for me, generally, I can say, Carly has been really involved with like football operations. I think she took vice president role in 2008. And then Kalen is kind of out in front with a lot of those philanthropic efforts. So for people who are wondering, like, what's next, can you kind of explain a little bit the dynamic there?
Yeah. As far as I understand it, and these are Jim Irsay's words, these are conversations I've had with him in the last couple of years. Carly IRSAY-GORDON, the oldest of the three sisters, will be the primary owner of this
Mm-hmm.
team. Now, the language and how it is presented might be all three of them, right? Casey Foyt is not as involved as the other two, but that doesn't mean her name isn't on the title as one of the three vice owners.
Mm-hmm.
But look, I mean, everyone around the team knows that Carly has been an increasing presence in the building, in the draft room, on the sideline during games with a headset. She has essentially been taking a crash course on how to become an NFL owner.
Mm-hmm.
Not unlike her father took 30 years ago when his dad, Bob Irsay, said, I want you to learn this organization from the ground up. Jim started as a ball boy, worked in the equipment room, worked in ticketing and sales, and eventually became a GM at 24. Now, Carly IRSAY-GORDON will be the primary owner of this team, as far as I understand, moving forward. I don't expect anything to change in terms of Pete Ward's role as the COO. For fans who don't know Pete Ward well, this guy runs the thing. I mean, he
Mm-hmm.
absolutely runs everything that's the non-football side of the Indianapolis Colts. He's been with the team since he was hiding out in Jim Irsay's van when they were leaving Baltimore under the snow in 1984. So he's a lifer as well. Chris Ballard will remain in charge of the football operations, that side of the building. But this is Carly's show. This has been well in the works for several years. Now, Jim, this was really important to him. The Colts are not leaving Indianapolis. I got that question. And the Colts are not being sold. And that is very important to him. And I can almost guarantee you that that is something he passed on to his daughters. The Colts were not a job to him. They were not a passion to him. They were his life. And he intended it to stay in the family. So this has been in the works for several years. They have been preparing for this. But I expect Carly to be the more front and focal person moving forward.
Yeah, that certainly seems to be, they haven't made any formal announcements yet, but like you mentioned, that's kind of been in the works for quite some time. So I know if there's someone more qualified than Carly, I really don't know, because like you said, you've seen her on the sidelines, you see her at practice throughout training camp with the tablet, with the headset and everything. So she's been very, very engaged for a long time. So certainly, I don't think they're prepared for any sort of blips with this. I think they're very prepared. So thanks again, Zach, for joining us. Obviously not the easiest last 24 hours for people in Indianapolis, but I appreciate you coming on and sharing some of your thoughts.
For sure. Thanks for having me, Jake.
All right. Thanks, man. All right. Thanks again to Zach for joining us. I think that was a really important chat to hear from someone who did actually have a personal relationship with Irsay. So I feel like I learned even more than I did before. I hope you guys did as well. Thanks again for joining us today and making Locked On Colts your first listen of the day. Now, for your next listen, please check out Locked On NFL Scouting. The NFL draft is over, but the roster moves and news never stop. Host Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino will make you the most informed NFL fan this offseason. Find Locked On NFL Scouting on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you want to become a Locked On Colts insider, chat with Zach and I directly, have us answer your questions, get the inside scoop of what's going on behind the scenes, follow the link in our show notes. If you don't already, please follow at Locked On Colts, at Jake Arthur NFL, and at Zach Hicks 2 on Twitter. We're also on TikTok and Instagram as well. Also, please be sure to subscribe on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. We would love those ratings and reviews as well. And with that, you guys have a great night, and we will see you tomorrow.